I'm Andrew Schwartz, and you're listening to The Truth of the Matter, a podcast by CSIS where we break down the top policy issues of the day and talk with the people that can help us best understand what's really going on. To get to the truth of the matter about the current state of affairs in the Middle East, Iran strikes in Israel, Israel's entry into Lebanon, and other matters surrounding this conflict, we have with us Dr. John Alterman, who is Senior Vice President, CSIS, Brzezinski Chair, and head of our Middle East Program. John, welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. Good to be with you.
So this is quite some circumstances we've seen unfold between Iran and Israel over the last 48 hours. Can you give us a sense of what led to this and why we're experiencing what we're experiencing in the world right now, and why the world may be on pins and needles about this?
The world's on pins and needles because you have two countries that may be on the brink of war. I think, quite frankly, the most important thing is to step back and to say that Prime Minister Netanyahu has been rolling the dice for a couple of weeks, and he feels like he is on a roll. The exploding pagers, the attacks on Hezbollah, the decapitation of the entire top layer of Hezbollah leadership, the fact that they elicited a strike from Iran, which, in cooperation with the United States, was rendered completely ineffective. From Prime Minister Netanyahu's perspective, there has been this intolerable threat to Israel coming from the north. The United States and others kept counseling patience. He lost patience. He went forward in a bolder manner than anybody thought Israel might do, and had greater success in his mind than anybody thought Israel might have. So the challenge now, and I don't know how much experience you have with gambling. I have almost no experience with gambling.
I have none, and I'm trying to keep my sons off the sports books.
So based on what I see in television and the movies, Netanyahu feels like he's got a really hot hand, that he has been taking these risks that everybody says are crazy risks to take. And in the near term, they've all been paying off well. I think that the challenge in the longer term is, what is Israel trying to do and how does it ensure it gets it? And, I have been increasingly been thinking about the fact that for the wars the U.S. has won, it's won not on the battlefield, but either at the negotiating table or in the post-conflict political environment. The fact is, we fought a war against Germany and Japan in World War II. The success of World War II was that you have friendly governments in Germany and Japan. Israel, it seems to me, is very reluctant to try to shape the political environment in Lebanon. I think it judges probably correctly it can't. It has been extremely reluctant to do much now on the political environment in Gaza, except to say it doesn't like the option of the Palestinian Authority. You see a lot of reluctance to Israel bolstering the power of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. It says the Palestinian Authority is hopeless. But I don't see in the longer term how Israel gets increased security without having a heavier hand, either directly or indirectly, ensuring that what comes later in these places is more amenable to Israeli security interests. It feels to me like the act of deterrence is inadequate, and it buys you a little bit of time, but that more comprehensive and more politically minded outcome would get Israel a lot more, not at a high cost, and would lead to much greater security.
Yeah, I want to talk about that for a second. But first, let me just follow up on what you said. Israel did this probably in defiance of some who cautioned restraint. But if you think about it, could any nation live with what Israel's been living with, both to its south and its north? I can't imagine the United States or any Western nation would. So I clearly understand what you're saying. There needs to be a structure and a strategy. But isn't part of the strategy just, we've got a real problem on two of our borders here, and we need to do something about it? In the immediate sense, isn't Israel just defending itself?
Israel is defending itself, and it's defending itself against terrorist groups. I think, that this has brought it a solid starting point, certainly with the U.S. government, if not necessarily with governments in other places. It does seem to me at the same time, though, that Hezbollah was relatively judicious in the kinds of attacks it had on Israel. It was using very short-range things in a very limited area. Israel was responding. So it felt a little bit like a war of attrition. Both sides were within boundaries, applying pressure to each other. Countries sometimes do that. Israel had a long war with attrition with the Egyptians over the Suez Canal. Hezbollah miscalculated, clearly. I don't rue the uprooting of Hezbollah from its stranglehold on Lebanese politics at all. But I also think, one of the mistakes the United States made in Iraq was the presumption that nothing is worse than the status quo. So if you have an unacceptable status quo, you go take out the bad guys and they will be replaced by something better because anything is better than the status quo. And it seems to me that you can imagine any number of future scenarios, either with a less cautious Hezbollah or an even more collapsed Lebanese state or any number of other things. And I don't get a sense that Israel has thought through that. With Gaza, there's no question in my mind. Hamas should not rule Gaza. But what's the Israeli strategy to get another force ruling Gaza? It seems to me that Israel hasn't thought through that. It's all about the guys we're dealing with are murderous and we have to push them from power with a sense that anything is better. And it seems to me that when you create these vacuums, you have a need to have something that begins to fill the vacuum, to shape the environment afterward, because otherwise the bad guys tend to have more advantages, stronger roots than the good guys. And that's why they're in power to start with. And unless you're encouraging the good guys, encouraging the Lebanese national government to be able to control all of its territory, unless you're finding ways to accelerate that, you end up with something that falls far short of what you're trying to do. The United States fundamentally got Iraq wrong because it systematically underestimated both its ability to shape the post-conflict environment in Iraq and underinvested in the post-conflict environment in Iraq. And you've had a murky situation with greater Iranian influence in Iraq as a consequence. I just don't see Israel investing or getting allies and partners teed up to invest in a better environment. Here's something, for example, where you could imagine the Arab Gulf states with deep pockets, an interest in engaging with Israel, strategic interests in marginalizing political Islam in the Middle East. You could get them to be partners in the future of Gaza. It feels like that is all getting tripped up by Israeli politics that say we have to have a sort of absolute approach to Palestinian governance, to rooting out Palestinian Authority and all these extremists, and we have to make it safe for Jews to be anywhere in the historic land of Israel, right? Unless you address the deeper issues of governance, then you're not getting to the end state you need to have security for Israel. Now, if you poll Israeli Jews, 4 to 5 Israeli Jews don't think they can have security in a two-state solution. And you can either say, okay, we're not going to pursue a two-state solution under any circumstances because 4 to 5 Israelis think it doesn't work, or you can try to build toward it and try to understand what kinds of assurances you need. But I don't see Israel doing either one. I see Israel going after bad guys, and I'm all for going after bad guys, causing damage to people who might not be bad guys, but might become bad guys because they've been traumatized, radicalized by what's happening. It doesn't seem to me like it gets us out of the cycle. It seems to me it embeds us in a cycle.
John, these are really bad guys. I mean, the United States and Israel designate both Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorists. Some of the rest of the world refers to them as militants. I see that in the New York Times and other publications. They're militants. They're not terrorists. Isn't the obligation of any government to eliminate terrorists from its sphere of influence? I mean, Israel is stuck with a Hezbollah to the north that has, while you said, been proportional. Also, it's been really deadly. It's moved 60,000 Israeli residents from their homes. And it's, we all know what's happened in Gaza as well.
But Andrew, it's Hezbollah not only displaced 60,000 Israelis from northern Israel, Hezbollah's picking an unwarranted war with Israel that just not only displaced 100,000 Lebanese from the south of Lebanon initially, but has resulted in 1 million Lebanese being displaced now in the face of the Israeli assault. Hezbollah is a mafia. It extracts wealth from the population as part of a protection racket. It takes away the sovereignty of the Lebanese government The point is not how do you preserve Hezbollah in the south. The point is how do you work to replace Hezbollah in Lebanon? How do you build on a weakened Hezbollah to have a strengthened Lebanese state? How do you weaken Hamas and have Palestinian self-rule that doesn't involve a murderous gang that also works on protection rackets and smuggling, intimidation, all those things? How do you get that mafia out and replace with something better? This is what I don't see Israel working on or giving space for others to work on. And Israel gives a sense that that's not really their responsibility. That's not a need. They're fighting a military war. But the military aspect only takes you so far. And what everybody involved in the United States war in Iraq and Afghanistan said is if you give me fewer diplomats, you have to give me more bullets because there's a relationship between the two. And what has struck me, certainly over the last year, but certainly also in the last few weeks, is this sense in the adequacy of the military response. And to my mind, the U.S. experience, certainly over the last 2 decades after 9/11, has been the inadequacy of the military response. That was a hard-earned lesson. The Israelis say, what you learned in counterinsurgency has no bearing on the battles we're fighting. I'm not totally convinced of that. The only security for Israel, to my mind, comes out of politics. And the role of the military action is to set up the politics, not to suffice for the politics. Now, Israel has limited tools to influence the politics, but there are a lot of people who are strategically aligned with Israel. And it seems to me that the missing link is how do you work and sort of allocate the effort so other states take the lead on the political stuff, and how do you shape the military action so it allows others to be active in the military stuff instead of saying, look, we're not riding in the back of an Israeli tank. That's up to them. And I think for Israel, that's a mistake.
So, as you point out, those groups are not yet working in real cohesion. But with Iran's attack on Israel, you're seeing columnists like the Wall Street Journal's Gerard Baker saying Israel defends itself and may save Western civilization. You're seeing Brett Stevens of the New York Times saying, actually, Israel needs to attack Iran. What happens next? This is really, everybody's worried about escalation. And yet Iran, the key actor that's supporting the terrorists in Lebanon and supporting the terrorists in Gaza, is firing on Israel within the last 24 hours.
So Iran is interested in preserving its own deterrent. I think Iran is feeling like its deterrents have been weakened, partly because of the collapse of Hezbollah, which happened remarkably quickly, partly because they've demonstrated now twice that what had been not only a feared ballistic missile capability, but the sort of unthinkable nature of Iran directly attacking Israel. And both of them have been demonstrated to be neutralized. So I think, if you show a little bit of strategic empathy with Iran, here's a country with literally no allies in the world that feels like everybody is trying to collapse their government. They feel that they are totally penetrated by Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence that work together.
And there's some real evidence that they are.
Right. And so I think Iran is looking for ways out of its own strategic dilemmas, which I would hasten to say are mostly of the Iranians' own making. I don't think they want to fight a sort of unconstrained war with Israel right now. I think they want to show an ability to hurt others, and what your friend Norm Rule memorably refers to as implausible deniability. They want to do things that demonstrate but don't really have a smoking gun, but everybody kind of knows it was Iran. And by the time everybody definitively proves it, the sort of urgency has passed. I think my guess is they would prefer to go to that space rather than try to send more and more things over, have 99% of them shot down, no effect on the ground. People keep saying these guys are a total paper tiger. I do think there are voices in Iran that want to lower the temperature, but I also don't think there are powerful voices in Iran that feel that the country can give up on its asymmetrical tools, which include both the nuclear program and all these proxy groups, because symmetrically, they are weaker than the countries they are most concerned about, principally us and the Israelis. The challenge for the United States is there any way to get them out of the cycle of hostility and to create a pathway where they behave better and the amount of tension diminishes? I think that's hard to do with the ideologically committed leadership that ultimately controls the strategic decision making in Iran. And it's hard to do with American politics, which will never reward you for lifting pressure on the Iranians. So I worry that we're both in a place where it's hard to find a pathway out. I would like to find a way where we can at least be moving toward reducing some tensions. As I say, I think that they're in an analytical space where they see everything as a threat, an existential threat. They think that our hostility is a one-way ratchet, and ultimately we're only trying to collapse the government, and it would be suicidal for them to abandon any of their tools. I would like them to think that they can actually improve themselves if they abandon some of their tools. That, for us, will involve some hard choices, tolerating intolerable behavior, partly involving their use of proxies, partly involving their nuclear program, and partly involving the way they treat the Iranian people themselves. As you and I have discussed before, I think Iran is going to be a profound foreign policy challenge for the rest of our professional careers. I think we can make things a little better, but I think that every effort to sort of solve the Iranian problem, and there are a lot of people in Washington who want to solve Iran, but I don't think this is a soluble problem. I think it's a problem you can maybe manage better, but I think solving it depends on changes in Iran, which are pretty large scale, which we don't control and which haven't happened.
So let's talk about what those changes might look like. I mean, is this something that Israel and the United States are firmly interested in doing at this point, in changing what's going on in Iran? Or is this, okay, Iran, shot their missiles, no one died, business as usual, Israel's going to go back, or Israel already has gone back to attacking Hezbollah in Lebanon, and, that's going to be the response from Iran. Is that what you see going forward?
So, what I would like if I were king of the world were to find something for the Iranians that was humiliating, at least to the leadership.
So an
Um,
off-ramp of sorts.
I think something humiliating that doesn't look like a full frontal challenge, something that shows capability and willingness, but does not publicly raise the stakes. The reality is we do have lots of tools against Iran. We have penetrated large parts of their government, as have the Israelis. That's the way they were able to assassinate Ismail Haniyeh when he was there for Pezeshkian's inauguration. That's a remarkable level of access, a remarkable capability. I don't think we should be assassinating more Iranians or Iranian guests, but I think something demonstrating our abilities is the right way to remind the Iranians. One of the things I remember hearing in Syria is when things between the Israelis and the Syrians a little bit out of control, the Israelis would fly fighter jets over Damascus low and hard, and the sonic booms would break windows. And the Israelis just demonstrate, we can do this. We have every ability to do this. And I think a demonstration of capacity without getting into this escalation scenario is the best of not tremendously good ways forward. Again, I think you have an Iranian president who was both allowed to win as a reformist and says we have to take care of our internal situation. I don't think he is a decision maker, but letting that play out, giving it a chance to move in our direction, because I think the ball in Iran is moving in our direction. Iran's proxies have been humiliated. Let the ball move in our direction a little bit. I think that's to our interest.
So I would imagine both Israel and the United States are extremely restless today about Iran, about its capabilities, and about its nuclear program and where that's headed. Of course, the United States and Israel famously, halted the program through cyber attack called Olympic Games. What are the options with the nuclear program? What are the options the U.S. and Israel have now against Iran without creating World War III here?
The most honest answer is I have no idea.
Yeah.
I assume that we have visibility into the nuclear program that not only I don't know about, but the Iranians don't know about. I assume that we and the Israelis have penetrated aspects of their technology. The fact that the Israelis were able to intercept the Hezbollah pagers, is a sign that the Israelis are all over the supply chain, as I assume we are, the supply chain of the Iranian nuclear program. Do we have ways to make centrifuges blow up? I don't know. Do we have ways to have other things go wrong? I don't know. I think sending a signal that doesn't require an escalatory response is wise because, as I say, it feels to me like if you looked at Iranian behavior over the last 2 weeks, it feels like at least some Iranians are getting the message that now is not the time to go all in. And so let the ball come to us. It's moving in the right direction. When your enemy is digging a hole, let it keep going in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a really good point. John, this has been really interesting and informative. I want to ask you before we sign off about the death of Hassan Nasrallah. You talked about this earlier in this podcast about the decapitation of the Hezbollah leadership, the decapitation of the Gaza Hamas leadership. What's next for both of those groups? Do they regroup? Are they easily able to regroup?
Yeah, certainly you lose capability when you've been decapitated, but there are always people there who want to rise to the moment, who want to fill the vacuum. Hassan Nasrallah, to my mind, was both charismatic and strategic. He was hostile to Israel and the United States, but he was very careful how he picked his fights. You could have somebody who is less careful. You could have somebody who is much less charismatic. As we've seen with Al-Qaeda, Ayman Zawahiri was much less charismatic and capable than Osama bin Laden, but killing Osama bin Laden didn't eliminate Al-Qaeda. Killing Ayman Zawahiri didn't eliminate Al-Qaeda, and we're still fighting jihadi groups in Iraq and Syria and Africa and a whole bunch of other places. So I don't think Hezbollah is going to go anywhere. As I say, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the Lebanese state to reassert sovereignty, and it's important to find ways to help that process. And I think there's a role for Arab states as well to help that process. I worry in Gaza that really there is no alternative. There's no fostering of an alternative. Yahya Sinwar is very strategic and very patient. Remember that he objected to the Netanyahu negotiated deal that freed him in exchange for Gilad Shalit, along with more than 1,000 other Hamas prisoners. Sinwar objected and said Hamas should have held out for more. So I think the idea of having a deal with Yahya Sinwar is fanciful. Yahya Sinwar's idea of failure is to die of heart attack while he's watching television. He wants to die a martyr. How you deal with that organization, I think from Sinwar's point of view, getting Israel locked down in an insurgency in Gaza that continues to isolate Israel in the world, where Israel has a rising domestic debate about what it's trying to do in Gaza. I think that's what victory looks like for Sinwar. And to my mind, the challenge for Israel in Gaza, and it really does control entry and exit from Gaza, the challenge is how do you help engender a better political future, a better governing environment in Gaza, not because it's going to be perfect, not because it's going to be pro-Israeli, but if it's not murderous and it's principally concerned with Gazans, that's a big step up. And that would also enhance Israeli security.
John, insightful as always, and you've given us a lot to think about in this increasingly complex set of circumstances we see in the Middle East. So thanks very much, and I'm sure we'll be talking in weeks to come.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Andrew.
If you enjoyed this podcast, check out our larger suite of CSIS podcasts. From Into Africa, The Asia Chessboard, China Power, AIDS 2020, The Trade Guys, Smart Women, Smart Power, and more. You can listen to them all on major streaming platforms like iTunes and Spotify. Visit csis.org/podcasts to see our full catalog.